was actively associated with the art of debating science since his early school life, and Sri Sama has been successful debater of Esther years and won many prizes. He is one amongst the few debaters from Assam who have so far won prizes in both East Zone as well as in National Inter-University Youth Festivals. He joined government service as a district transport officer after having qualified in combined competitive examination conducted by the Assam Public Service Commission, but resigned subsequently on 12 January 2012 to pursue a different life in the light of teaching of Sri Aurobindo, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. He has so far translated and published 7 numbers of books. Some of the famous titles are Secularism, Rashtrodhar Anya Iknam, Bharatiya Sanskriti Bhitti, Karma Yogi, Bhratar Navajanama. He had already delivered a total 100 lectures during the period with effect from 5th December 2020 to 25th December 2021 on the foundation of Indian cultures in the light of Sri Aurobindo, as a part of year-long 150 hours lecture series being organized by Center for Studies in Human Development, Assam University, Silchar, Assam. He is now delivering lectures as a part of another online series consisting of 150 lectures on understanding the universal message of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Aurobindo, being organized by Center of Studies in Human Development, Assam University, Silchar, as a key and sole speaker cum facilitator for the entire year. Now he is parallelly delivering online lectures as an expert faculty member in year-long course entitled Gita for Life in the Light of Sri Aurobindo, consisting 150 lectures, commenced with effect from 21st February 2022, being organized by Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. In the year 2021, he has translated the book, The Bharatiya Sanskriti Bhitti, originally authored by Sri Aurobindo, is conferred with prestigious Sahitya Academy Translation Prize 2020 in Assamese. He is at present acting as one of the members of Executive Council, Guwahati University. I would be very happy to invite Sri Diganta Sharmaji to enlighten all our audience. Sir.
Namaskar, respected M.S.M. Sundarji, Advisor Naac, respected Onil Gokakji, retired officer, Indian Administrative Service, respected Prasant Parhaji, the Deputy Advisor Naac, and the esteemed cultured souls present here. First, there is a clarification. Neither am I a scholar, nor do I possess any scholarship. Then why this audacity on my part? I have a sense of offering anything and everything at the lotus feet of the Supreme Divine Mother. And this is the sole source of my strength and audacity. So here, we are to deliberate upon life of Sri Aurobindo in the field of education. His life is a vast life. Once Sri Aurobindo himself said, when one biographer attempted to write on him and expressed his wish before him, then Sri Aurobindo said, no one can write on me. No one can write on me. Why? Because he says, my life has not been on the surface for men to see. Yet, biographers have attempted, and already Onil Kokakji has given us a glimpse of his life. So I will focus certain aspect of his life. Basically, first his political life, and then his spiritual life, and then I will move on to his contribution in his education. But let us begin with a passage from Sri Aurobindo's writing. In fact, it was his message, Independence Day message, broadcast by Trishnopoli Radio Center on the eve of our independence, that is on 14th August 1947. Maharishi says in that Independence Day message, August 15th is the birthday of free India. It marks for her the end of an old era, the beginning of a new age. But it has a significance not only for us, but for Asia and the whole world. For it signifies the entry into the Committee of Nations of a new power with untold potentialities, which has a great part to play in determining the political, social, cultural, and spiritual future of humanity. To me personally, it must necessarily be gratifying that this day, which was notable only for me, because it was my own birthday, celebrated annually by those who have accepted my gospel of life, should have acquired this vast significance. As a mystic, I take this identification not as a coincidence or fortuitous accident, but as a sanction and seal of the divine power which guides my steps on the work with which I began life. Indeed, almost all the world movements which I hope to see fulfilled in my lifetime, though at that time they looked like impossible dreams, I can observe on this day either approaching fruition or initiated or on the way to their achievement. So now let me quote his counsel, Barrister Chittaranjan Das. In fact, it was his last submission in defense of Sri Aurobindo in connection with his Alipur bomb case. What he said, and it was almost a prophetic statement. It came to his mouth spontaneously, because at that time, Mahajogi was not Mahajogi. He was just a revolutionary, and Barrister Chittaranjan Das was not a prophet. So C.R. Das' defense of Sri Aurobindo in the session court spanned across 8 days. And he concluded with an impassioned appeal. And what was that appeal? To the court, Chittaranjan Das says, my appeal to you, therefore, is that a man like this, who is being charged with the offenses imputed to him, stands not only before the bar of this high court, bar in this court, but stands before the bar of the high court of history. And my appeal to you is this, that long after this controversy is hushed in silence, long after this turmoil, this agitation ceases, long after he is dead and gone, he will be looked upon as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. Long after
he is dead and gone, his words will be echoed and re-echoed, not only in India, but across distant seas and lands. Therefore, I say that the man in his position is not only standing before the bar of this court, but before the bar of High Court of history. The time has come for you, sir, to consider your judgment, and for you, addressing the whole gathering, gentlemen, to consider your verdict. So who was Sri Aurobindo? The poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. So, what did he do as a political worker? He was the pioneer and vanguard of the Swadeshi movement. He was the pioneer of the revolutionary movement in India. So, that's a quick glimpse on his political life. And my presentation would be a sort of compilation from his words directly, and it will not be with my own inferior interpretation. He was the Sri Aurobindo, as Onilji has already mentioned. He was the pioneer and vanguard who demanded first absolute Swaraj for India. He was the first to demand absolute Swaraj for India. But what is absolute Swaraj? What is absolute Swaraj? But what is absolute Swaraj? Let me define in his own words. He says, in 23rd April 1907, 23rd April 1907, before Congress took Purna Swaraj resolution in Lahore Congress, decades after. So he said in 1907, 23rd April, the Congress has contented itself with demanding self-government as it exists in the colonies. We of the new school would not pitch our ideal 1 inch lower than the absolute Swaraj. And what is that absolute Swaraj? Self-government as it exists in the United Kingdoms. Self-government as it exists in the United Kingdom. So he was the pioneer of the Swadeshi movement, vanguard of the revolutionary movement in India, and he who demanded first absolute Swaraj for India. So, what was the core of his political campaigning? What was the core ideas of his political campaigning? In his own words, he says there are four subjects which usually form the subject matter of a nationalist speech. Four subjects. What are those four subjects? First one is first Swadeshi. Second, boycott. Third, Swaraj. And fourth, national education. Fourth was national education. So Swadeshi is the method. The way, the road by which the nation advances. Boycott is only the other side of Swadeshi, and both the Swadeshi and the boycott movements are actually encouraged in principle in the greater part of this country. National education is the training of the mind and heart of the younger generation. And then what was the goal? Swaraj is the goal of our national life. Swaraj was the goal of our national life. So then, what is the Swaraj? Then what is the concept of Swaraj? Is Swaraj only mere self-government? Maharishi defines. I have told you that Swadeshi and boycott are the road. Swadeshi and boycott are the road, the way which leads to the goal. And what was the goal? Swadeshi and boycott are the way to the goal of Swaraj. Swadeshi and boycott are the way to the goal of Swaraj. There has been much discussion about the definition of Swaraj. Swaraj has been defined as self-government. It has been defined by Dadabhai Nauraji as self-governing colony. What was then Swaraj for him? See, in our view, self-government is merely one aspect of Swaraj. Self-government is merely one aspect of Swaraj. Then what is the other aspect? Maharishi says, when we speak of Swaraj, we mean the principle of national life. We mean the principle of national life, independent of any form of government. Independent form of any government. This is the political concept. National life, Swaraj means national life, not merely self-government. But there is a spiritual meaning too. There is a spiritual meaning too. The word Swaraj is not a new word, but as old one. It is as old as literature and civilization. The meaning of Swaraj in our ancient literature is the spiritual condition of the soul which attains to mukti, when the soul is independent of everything but itself, when it exists in the joy of its life and greatness, when it is mukta, that is Swaraj. So Swaraj for us is not merely self-government, but for us Swaraj means national life and the condition of our soul. And then, lastly, what was the core of his political life? What was the main sides of his political life? He himself said he had three sides of his political life. And what are those three sides? The first, there was the action. So I have already said that he was the pioneer, vanguard, and the Gyan Guru of the revolutionary movement in India. He was the pioneer. He was the vanguard. And first, so three sides of his political life. So first one is, there was the action with which he started. And what was that? A secret revolutionary propaganda. A secret revolutionary propaganda. For why? For why? Secret revolutionary propaganda and organization of which the central object was the preparation of an armed insurrection. So that was his first side of his political life, as the vanguard of the Swadeshi movement, as the pioneer of the revolutionary movement in India. So, and what was the second side of his political life? Secondly, there was a public propaganda. There was a public propaganda intended to convert the whole nation to the ideal of independence, which was regarded at that time by the vast majority of Indians as unpractical and impossible and almost insane chimera. Still, it was his second side of his political life, propaganda. First was a secret revolutionary war. And what was the third side? Thirdly, there was the organization of the people to carry on a public and united opposition and undermining of the foreign rule through an increasing non-cooperation and passive resistance. So Gandhi took the idea of non-cooperation from his doctrine of passive resistance. And that is why Kavi Guru addressed him as the voice incarnation of the nation's soul. Swadesh Atma ki Bani Murti, Swadesh Attar Bani Murti, Swadesh Atma ki Bani Murti, voice incarnation of the nation's soul. And finally, there is a birthday message from Syama Prasad Mukherjee in 1949. It's a concise letter, it's a concise message, but in my opinion, a very comprehensive one in sense and significance from none other than Syama Prasad Mukherjee. Among the Indian politicians, in my opinion, Syama Prasad Mukherjee only understood Sri Aurobindo in its proper spirit. So, let me quote Syama Prasad Mukherjee. And it was written on 13th August 1949, and Maharishi took Samadhi in the year 1950. Written on 13th August 1949, definitely a letter supposed to be sent to Pondicherry. So, Syama Prasad Mukherjee writes, "It is a happy agari that the anniversary of our independence coincides with the anniversary of Sri Aurobindo's birthday. He embodies in a peculiar sense. So for Rabindranath Tagore, he was the voice incarnation of the nation's soul. For Syama Prasad, he was the embodiment of the creative and ever-resurgent soul of India. He was the embodiment of the creative and ever-resurgent soul of India. For Rabindranath, he was the voice incarnation of nation's soul. For Chittaranjan Das, he was the poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity." So he writes, he embodies in a peculiar sense the creative and ever-resurgent soul of India. He is no cloistered recluse, for from his spiritual retreat, he remains in continuous communion with the major social and political forces of the world. We have no doubt attained our political independence, but we have yet to regain our spiritual heritage. At a time when moral squalor and spiritual degeneration, hatred, greed seem ready to bring us down, the light of Pondicherry glows with a steady sign, a beacon to India as to the world at large. And that is why Maharishi later says, all life is yoga. Yoga is not to escape from life, but yoga, whole life is yoga, all life is yoga. So now on his spiritual life. Because as Maharishi himself said, that no one can write on me because my life has not been on the surface for men to see. So how a small fry like me, how I can attempt to talk about his spiritual life? So I have to take help from Mother's writing. What Mother has said on Sri Aurobindo. Mother met Sri Aurobindo for the first time on 29th March 1914. 29th March 1914. And on the very next day, she wrote in her diary. So this is from her diary after seeing Sri Aurobindo. What she wrote. Mother wrote, "It matters little that there are thousands of beings plunged in the densest ignorance. He whom we saw yesterday is on earth. He whom we saw yesterday is on earth. His presence is enough to prove. That a day will come when darkness shall be transformed into light, and thy reign shall be indeed established upon earth." Then, what Sri Aurobindo represents in world history? A beautiful answer from the Mother. And perhaps nobody could write except Mother like this. So what does Sri Aurobindo represents in the world history? Mother says, what Sri Aurobindo represents in the world history is not a teaching. Is not a teaching, not even a revelation. Then what it is? It is not teaching, not even a revelation. Then what it is? It is a decisive action. It is a decisive action direct from the Supreme. It's a decisive action direct from the Supreme. And why he came to earth? Mother says, he has come to beat the earth. He has come to earth. He has come to beat the earth to prepare for its luminous future. For its luminous future. Sri Aurobindo has brought to the world the assurance of a divine future. Assurance of a divine future. Sri Aurobindo has come on earth not to bring a teaching or a creed in competition with previous creed or teachings, but to show the way, to overpass the past, and to open concretely the route towards an imminent and inevitable future. Sri Aurobindo does not belong to the past. Sri Aurobindo does not belong to the past, nor to the history. Sri Aurobindo is the future. Sri Aurobindo is the future, advancing towards its realization. So this is all about his spiritual life. Now let me move on to his educational contribution. But before I move on to his educational contribution, let me discuss something from the writings of Professor Kirit Joshi. Many of you may perhaps heard about him. He was an IS officer of 1954 batch. He continued in service only for 2 years. He resigned and joined Pondicherry Sri Aurobindo Ashram. But in 1972, by then Prime Minister, he was again forced to take charge of the Special Secretary Education Department in 1972, even after resignation, until his passing away. He was the many you may know or may not know. He was the spirit behind this new education policy 2020 initiated by our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, Kirit Joshi was his educational advisor for 10 long years. Though he was residing in Pondicherry, he was the educational advisor to the Chief Minister Gujarat. So now you can guess from where Honorable Prime Minister has got his vision on education. So first, a clarification from his writing, from late Professor Kirit Joshi's writing. And his writings are actually nothing but expansion of Sri Aurobindo's idea only. So he says, there is at present a need to clarify the meaning and aim of education. Meaning and aim of education. Just as it's necessary to clarify the meaning and aim of yoga. Why? We are celebrating since 2015 International Day of Yoga. We are doing asanas and pranayamas. Still, Kirit Joshi says, just as it's necessary to clarify the meaning and aim of yoga. Because yoga is now almost 10% identified only with Hatha Yoga, with asana and pranayamas. But asana and pranayamas are only 2 means of 1,000 means. 2 means among 1,000 means. And that is why Maharishi says all life is yoga. Yoga is not a therapeutic science. Though yoga can cure many diseases, yoga is not a discipline to keep our health in a good condition. Then what is yoga? In Mad Bhagavad Gita, Krishna asks Arjuna, "Je yogi bhavarjuna, hey Arjun, yogi bhava." Definitely then asana and pranayama was not referred to. So Kirit Joshi says, just as it is necessary to clarify the meaning and aim of yoga. Why? Because yoga is often identified exclusively with the Hatha yoga, and thus its true psychological nature remains quite vague. True psychological nature. Hatha yoga is one of the yogas, one of the means of yogas. But we have Jnana Yoga, we have Karma Yoga, we have Bhakti Yoga, we have Tantric Yoga. So even Raja Yoga has accepted only 25% from asana and the pranayama. In Ashtanga Yoga, only 2 parts is constituted by asana and the pranayama. 6 are not related to asana and the pranayama. So yoga is not to be identified only with Hatha yoga. All life is yoga. So all life is yoga. Then Kirit Joshi says, why? Why it's a psychological process? Because what is yoga? Yoga is a methodized effort towards perfection. First condition, methodized effort towards perfection. Second, but the how? What is the way? Methodized effort towards perfection. But what is the process? Process is the expression of the latent potentialities. So process is the expression of the latent potentiality within us. And what is highest condition of victory in that effort? What is the highest condition? The perfection is goal. But what is the highest goal? A union of the human individual with the universal and transcendental existence. So, a union, goal is perfection. And what is the way? Way is the expression of the potentialities latent within us. Expression of potentialities latent within us. Then, Kirit Joshi says, similarly, education is often identified with vocational training. Education is often identified with vocational training or with some kind of mental culture. Education, vocational training. As if education has no other goal, only we are to satisfy the corporates. We are born to be great servant. We are born to be great slave. But I am not prepared to serve multinational. I myself want to be another multinational. I want to be a job creator. I do not want to be a job beggar. I want to be a job aspirant. And that potentiality is within me. That potentiality is within me. I am not ready to be a job beggar. Because I am not born to be a beggar. I am born to be a king. But fortunately or unfortunately, because this is the age of commercial age, we are being guided by three super rulers: the opulent plutocrat, the successful mammoth capitalist, and the organizer of industries. Maharishi says, these three are the ruler, supermen of this commercial age. But Maharishi has said that they are the occult rulers, not the formal rulers, but they are the occult rulers. The opulent plutocrat, the successful mammoth capitalist, and the organizer of industries. But I am not prepared to serve them. I want to be another job creator. I want to be another multinational. Because I am not born to be a beggar. So, and its fundamental nature of integral psychological process remains quite pale. So what is education? An integral psychological process. It remains quite pale because it is nowadays only identified with vocational training. So it is a very important, because you may ask me questions after the end of my lecture about the pedagogical aspect. So here Kirit Joshi says, in the right view of yoga and education, right view of yoga and education, we find education and yoga are one and identical process. Not similar. He has used the word identical. Yoga and India's vision of education are one and identical, not even similar. It's identical process. So then, before moving on to Maharishi's philosophy on education, what is present education? What do you mean by education today? It consists of three aspects. First one is acquiring knowledge. As we acquire money from outside, we are to acquire knowledge from outside. We are to acquire knowledge from outside. This is the first aspect. We are to acquire knowledge from textbook. We are to acquire knowledge from libraries. We are to acquire knowledge from lectures, etc., etc. So acquiring of knowledge is the first aspect of the present education system. And the second, getting introduced to tangible objects. This is the sense of the writing of one of Sri Aurobindo's greatest disciple, Nalinikanta Gupta. I have taken this idea from his writings. And the third aspect is gaining mastery over certain subjects. This is all about education. Acquiring knowledge, getting introduced to tangible objects, and third one is mastery over subjects. And in rare cases, very, very rare cases, not understood by everybody, in very rare cases, that education signifies cultivation of faculties also. But it's a very rare, very rare. Basically, education, our higher education, lower education, primary education, all is concerned about acquiring knowledge, getting introduction to tangible objects, and mastery of our subject. So, but what we need first? Man is a conscious being. How a conscious being can be awakened by unconscious subject? In education process, first we need what? Nolinida says, first we need man. Man is the primary element of education. Man, not the subject. Man. So what we need first is man, the man who has realized in his heart of hearts. What he has realized in his heart of hearts? The throb of life. The throb of life, the source of strength. When we have realized throb of life, and when we have realized our strength within, then we will not serve multinational. Then we will be job creator like Jamshedji Tata. Like Jamshedji Tata. So it is not difficult for such a man to be well equipped with arms and ammunition of life. For such men means who have realized throb of his life, throb of life in the heart of his heart, and who has realized his strength within. For him, it is not difficult to survive in this world. So, why this education is, we have said, there's acquiring of knowledge, mastery over subjects, getting introduced to tangible objects, definitely part of education, but not the whole of education. What I am saying, these are part of education, but not the whole of education. Why? Because it ignores man. Because it ignores life. And Nolinida speaks three things specifically. He says, in the first place, such an education ignores the learner. Ignores the learner. Second, it does not try to establish any simple and natural relationship with the learner. No relationship with the learner. Ignoring the learner first, then second, no relation with the learner. And third, it does not allow him to realize deeply and firmly his inner life pulse. He is only asked, you are to gain mastery over certain subjects. Then you will be called civilized. So now Maharishi some general utterances on education. Few utterances. And it is from his book, Human Cycle. Why modern men value education at all? Why we value? Maharishi says he values education for its utility. For its utility. What type of utility? In fitting a man for success. In fitting a man for success in where? In a socialized industrial existence. Otherwise, we would not have given value to the education. Because all over the world, education is guided by the instrumental value of education, not by the intrinsic value of education. Education is not initiated for the sake of education. Education is initiated for vocational. Education is being treated as vocational training. So it is what is called instrumental value of education. So he values education for its utility in fitting a man for success in a socialized industrial existence. And why we value science? For its knowledge? No. Why we value science? The science for the useful invention and knowledge, the comforts, the conveniences, but mercenary of production with which it earns him, its power for organization, regulation, stimulus to production, not for any scientific knowledge. We value science, we worship science for these purposes only. And then his first vision, education. Actually, Aurobindo's vision is nothing but India's vision of education, presented in a very modern way, presented in the modern perspective. So then Maharishi says that two things. The moreover, although man has not yet really heard and understand the message of the sages. And what was the message of the sages? And modern world has accepted the message of the thinkers. Modern world has rejected the sages. And what was the message of the sages? And what was the message of the thinker? Thinker says, educate thyself. What is wrong in it? It seems there is nothing wrong in it. But then it is the message of the thinker, not the sages. And what is wrong in it? Educate thyself. It's a very good thing. But sages says, know thyself. Know thyself. Atmanam viddhi. Know thyself. So this is the difference. So modern world has accepted the message of the thinkers and rejected sages. Rejected India's age-old eternal message, Atmanam viddhi, know thyself. So modern India has to decide whether education should be educating yourself or knowing yourself, knowing oneself. And then Maharishi says that the first principle of the teaching is that nothing can be taught. Nothing can be taught. And Vivekananda goes one step further. You will be rather antagonized if I quote Vivekananda. Vivekananda says, teacher spoils everything, not something. Vivekananda says, teacher spoils everything by thinking that he is teaching. Then who is teaching us? While introducing me, Prasanji has mentioned that I am a postgraduate of accountancy. I was a RTO. Definitely, I was taught accountancy in my college by my esteemed teachers. But who now is teaching me all these things? So modern educational pedagogy has to answer, who taught Ekologya? Ekologya was refused by his Guru Dronacharya. Yet he became a great archer, rather greater than Arjuna. modern educational pedagogy has to answer. And that is why perhaps Vivekananda says, teacher spoils everything by thinking that he is teaching. And Maharishi says, nothing can be taught. Nothing can be taught. Then already Gokakji has already mentioned, before we moving on to his philosophy of education, we are to understand what we know by nation. What we know by nation first. The concept of nation. First concept of man, then concept of nation, and then concept of humanity. So three things we have to know first before moving on to his philosophy of education. We have to first know the concept of man. So India has seen always in man, the individual, a soul. A soul, and what is soul? A portion of the divinity. A portion of the divinity enwrapped in mind and body. Enwrapped in mind and body, a conscious manifestation in nature. A conscious manifestation in nature of the universal self and spirit. So, this is the first concept we are to understand. This is in fact the India's concept of man. India's concept of man. Who is man? So man, India has always seen in man the individual as soul. And what is soul? A portion of the divinity enwrapped in mind and body. And what is soul? A conscious manifestation of this divine, a living power of the eternal truth. Gita says, who are we? Mama eva angsha sanatana, my portion eternal. Krishna says, my portion eternal. So this is the first concept we are to understand. Then what is nation for India? So, and similarly, India has not understood by the nation or people an organized state. An armed and efficient community well prepared for the struggle of life, and putting all at the surface of the national ego. Then what is nation for India? So, but a great communal soul and life. So, as we are individual soul, nation is just the collective soul. So, nation is soul, a manifestation of the eternal truth. Not just the name of the inhabitants. So, it's also a collective soul, it's nation soul. So, by nation, we mean a soul, just it is a collective soul. Just we are individual soul, and as individual soul, we are part of that eternal truth. And nation is also a power of that eternal truth. Just individual is individual soul, we are collective soul. And then what is humanity? Then what is humanity? Then what is humanity? To humanity also must be in accordance with her ancient vision of the universal self. Gokakji has already mentioned that universal soul manifesting in the human race. So there is an individual soul, there is a nation soul, in between universal soul and collective soul, in between there is a nation soul. And soul is nothing but conscious manifestation of the divine and a living power of the eternal truth. So this is very fundamental thing we have to understand before moving on to his spiritual, his education and philosophy. So why this education is defective, Maharishi says. Just as Nolinida says, first is, it ignores the psychology of man. It ignores the psychology of man, first thing. Second, it loads the mind laboriously with numerous little packets of information. Third, and what is the consequence? By the method used in this loading process, what we do, it's a very dangerous thing. Maharishi says, damages or atrophies. What atrophies and what damages? The faculties and instruments by which man assimilate, create, and grows in intellect, manhood, and energy. So what a dangerous thing he has said. He has said that it loads the mind laboriously with numerous little packets of information. And by the process, what we do, and by the methods used in this loading process, damages or atrophies the faculties and instruments by which man assimilate, create, and grows in intellect, manhood, and energy. So what is the agenda of education? Growth of intellect, growth of manhood, and the growth of energy. Growth of energy. So, another vital defect, he says, because he was all through his life a strong advocate of national education. He says, it shared with the old system the defect of ignoring the psychology of the race. So first psychology of the individual, then psychology of the race. Psychology of the race. But he cautions here, the mere inclusion of the matter of Indian thought and culture in the field of knowledge does not make a system education Indian. So India's vision has to be incorporated. Vision of man, vision of nation, vision of humanity, and above all, the India's own pedagogical process. India's own pedagogical process. So then what is the first necessity? What is the first necessity? The first necessity for the building up of a great intellectual superstructure, what we first need to provide a foundation strong enough to bear it. We need a strong foundation. For building up a great intellectual superstructure, we need foundation. But what is the meaning of that foundation? What is the meaning of that foundation? Those systems of education which start from an insufficient knowledge of man, when think they have provided a satisfactory foundation. By what? When they have supplied the student with a large or well-equipped mass of information on the various subjects, then they think that we have built up the foundation. If we could give the loads of information, then we think that the foundation is built up. But then Maharishi says here, but the error here is fundamental. Information cannot be the foundation of intelligence. Information cannot be the foundation of intelligence. It can only be part of the material. It can only be the part of the material out of which knower builds knowledge, the starting point, the nucleus of fresh discovery and enlarged creation. But information cannot be the foundation of intelligence. Then what? And then Maharishi says here a very, very revealing statement. Perhaps you will be surprised. She says, an education that confines itself to imparting knowledge is no education. Confining only to knowledge, confining only to imparting knowledge is no education. And he says, information is not the foundations of intelligence. So then what we need? What we need? The various faculties of memory. Various faculties of memory, judgment, imagination, perception, reasoning, which build the edifice of thought and knowledge for the knower, must not only be equipped with their feet and sufficient tools and materials, but trained to bring fresh material and use more skillfully those of which they are in possession. So they have to be trained to discover fresh material. And then, precise meaning of that foundation. What do you mean by the foundation for building intellectual superstructure? What does it mean? And the foundation of the instructor, they have to build. They have to build means this memory, judgment, imagination, perception, reasoning, etc., etc. They have to build the foundation. And what is that foundation? And the foundation of the structure they have to build can only be the provision of a fund of force and energy. So building foundation means provisioning for force and energy. But then Maharishi asks one question: where is that energy to be found? Where is that energy to be found? This is the book, 4 small article, Brain of India. He has described everything. So this is a separate subject fit for separate treatment. But he has outlined the source of that energy. Thus I give you only one answer. All answer lies in the practice of Brahmacharya. But what is the Brahmacharya? Brahmacharya is not about something moral and all. But what is that? Here he asks a very prominent question. What was the secret of that gigantic intellectuality, spirituality, and superhuman moral force which we see pulsating in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, in the ancient philosophy, in the supreme poetry, art, sculpture, and architecture of India? So energy is to be found. So the name of the very title of this 4 article is the Brain of India. So if I get another occasion, then I can discuss. But I have just mentioned. So Maharishi has asked the question and also given the answer. So where is that energy to be found? So energy to be found in the brain of India. Then I am coming close to great definition of education. To great definition of education given by Maharishi. It's a comprehensive definition. So Maharishi says the comprehensive definition. But the acquiring of various kinds of information is only one. And not the chief of the means and necessities of education. Then what is its central aim? What is the central aim of education? He says its central aim is the building of the powers. Its central aim is the building of the powers of the human mind and spirit. Building of the human mind and spirit. Then he says it is the formation. Rather, as I would prefer to view it, that the evoking of knowledge and will, not the acquiring of knowledge. There is a vast fundamental difference between acquiring of knowledge and evoking of knowledge. So as I would prefer to view it, the evoking of knowledge and will and of the power. And why we are to evoke that knowledge? Why? He gives the answer: to use knowledge, to use character and culture, that at least if no more. So it's a comprehensive definition. But how it will be effected, it is a pedagogical question. A separate subject fit for separate treatment. So it is not easy. I have all the works with me, but in 1 hour or 2 hours it's not possible. So he says but the acquiring of various kinds of information is only one and not the chief of the means and necessities of education. Its central aim is the building of the powers of the human mind and spirit. It is the formation, as I would prefer to view it, the evoking of knowledge and will and of the power to use knowledge, character and culture. So evoking of knowledge, power and will. This is the central aim. And why we are to evoke? We are to evoke to use knowledge, character and culture. So information is not the central purpose. It's not the central purpose, but only one aspect, not the central purpose. Then let me give the next comprehensive definition. So, in this definition, he has given his all ideas. national education, universal education, everything. It's a very comprehensive. And though for those inquisitive listeners, they can refer to his a preface to national education and a system of national education, where he says it is from his a preface on national education. I think there can be no great dispute that there are three things which have to be taken into account. Three things in a true and living education. Three things in a true and living education. What are those three things? First one is the man, the individual in his commonness, in his uniqueness. Man. First element is man. The second, the nation. Second is the nation or people. And the third one is universal humanity. So these are the three things. Three things which have to be taken into account in a true and living education. Not the subject. Subjects are secondary. Evoking of knowledge. So then he says it follows that alone will be a true and living education. What? Which helps to bring out to full advantage. Which helps to bring out to full advantage, number one. Number two, makes ready for the full purpose and scope of human life. So these are the two agenda. Makes ready for the full purpose and scope of human life. Full purpose and scope of human life, number one. And number two, to bring out to full advantage. But what? What? He says, all that is in the individual man, whatever is within, power, perfection, strength, energy, knowledge, whatever is in individual being. This is education. And to bringing out to full advantage, and actually, if I get time, I will tell you the very original meaning of the word education is bringing out. You just check it. The very meaning of the word education is bringing out. And Plato says remembrance. Remembrance of what? Remembrance of what already we have within us. So it alone will be a true and living education which helps to bring out to full advantage, makes ready for the full purpose and scope of human life that is in the individual man. So for man, this is the purpose. Whatever is within us, it has to be brought out. We have to be made ready for the full scope of life, because we can become Brahman also. We are not born to be slave. We are born here to become Brahman. First, we are Nara, then we have to be transformed into Narayan. Nara, then we have to be transformed into Narottam. Then we have to be transformed into Narayan. This is our journey. Professor Prahladji utters that Asatu ma Satgamaya, Tamasu ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrittur ma Amritam Gamaya. What is the sense of this sloka? First, we are born with Nara. We have to be Narottam. Then we have to become Narayan. So education has to prepare us. And the second one is nations, concerning nation. And then he says, and which at the same time helps him. Helps him in what respect? Helps him to enter into his right relation with the life, mind, and soul of the people to which he belongs. So nation. He takes care of everything. And then he says, and with that great total life, mind, and soul of humanity. Why? He has given the logic. Why? Why we are to learn the right relationship that is to be established with the great life, mind, and soul of humanity? Because he himself is a unit of that humanity. And his nation is also an indivisible part of that humanity. This is a truth. So this is another another great example, a great definition of education. And now, I just quickly mention his 8th philosophy of education, just single line, because I'm not going to explain. So, how we can summarize his ideal, his vision of education? It can be summarized into 8 principles. Though he himself had given 3 principles of education, but here we will be outlining 8 principles of his educational vision. What are those? First one is that nothing can be taught, knowledge is within, knowledge is to be evoked. But how it is to be evoked? The answer is here, there in brain of India. It's another occasion. If I get chance, then I shall deliberate upon. But, so first principle is nothing can be taught, knowledge is within, knowledge is to be evoked. So knowledge is to be acquired, knowledge is not to be acquired from outside. Knowledge is to be acquired from inside. So education is not an outside-inside process. Education is basically an inside-outside process. Vivekananda says, education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. Not acquiring of knowledge, but manifestation. Education is manifestation. The second principle is, what is his second principle? Second principle is that mind has to be consulted. Mind has to be consulted. And what is the meaning of sense of mind has to be consulted? The sense is Swabhava and Swadharma. Swabhava and Swadharma of individual as well as nation has to be taken into consideration. So this is his second principle, we can summarize. And what is the third? Third principle is to work from the near to the far. To work from the near to the far. What is its sense? The basis of a man's nature is almost always in addition to his soul's past, his heredity, his surroundings, his nationality, his country, the soil from which he draws sustenance, the air which he breathes, the sights, sounds, habits to which he is accustomed. So we must not take up the nature by the roots. So Maharishi says, first, so education should start from the near, then to the far. First, we have to become national, then we have to become universal. First, we have to become individual, then we have to become national, then we have to become universal. So to work from the near to the far, this is these 3 things. And then, fourth principle, education has to be national, but not parochial and sectarian. It has to be national, but not to be parochial and sectarian. But what is national education? It's a separate subject. Separate subject fit for separate treatment. And then what is the 5th principle? We can summarize. 5th principle is focus to be changed. Focus to be changed to the adequate building up of the faculties of knowledge. From what? From furnishing of knowledge. So focus should be building up of faculties of knowledge. So we have to change the focus of our educational effort from the furnishing of knowledge to the adequate building up of the faculties of knowledge and strengthening of the moral fabric of the student. So this is 5th. And what is the 6th? 6th principle we can summarize. 6th principle we can summarize that ethical aesthetic nature too has to be developed. Ethical and aesthetic nature. Not only mental, but ethical and aesthetical nature. Because Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So ethical, aesthetical nature has to be developed. But we are surely not referring to any conventional moral training by the teacher. But what is, according to him, moral education is a separate subject fit for separate treatment. So then the 7th principle. What is the 7th principle? This is the most important. Most important. Because we have to become Narayan. This is the ultimate goal. This is the ultimate goal. So Maharishi says we cannot stop. Actually it is as said by Jugal Kishore Mukherjee, one of his great disciples again, that we cannot stop at the borders of ordinary humanity with all its basic insufficient and limitations. So, what is the purpose? The children should be made ready to develop into divine nature. So children should be made ready to divine nature. Why? Maharishi, here one observations of Maharishi. Because modern education has failed to transform individual. So we are to seek alternative. Maharishi says, it has not been found in experience. Whatever might have once been hope. What is? That education and intellectual training by itself can change man. It only provides the human individual and collective ego with better information and a more efficient machinery for its self-affirmation, but leaves it the same unsensed human ego. So we are to move beyond intellectuality. And here, regarding one thing, one very important, because it is very important element, the seventh principle. So why the education of soul? As Anilji has mentioned, the education of soul and psychic being and spiritual. What is psychic being is nothing but our inner own individual soul, popularly known as soul, individual soul. Maharishi says, it is not yet realized what this soul is. What this soul is. We are talking of India's vision of education, and it is from his Human Cycle book. From the book is entitled The Human Cycle. It is not yet realized what this soul is, or that the true secret, whether with child or man, is to help him to find his deeper self, the real psychic entity within. But man has not yet realized. Then she says that if we ever give it a chance to come forward, it means that soul, that psychic entity. So if we ever give it a chance to come forward, and still more, if we call it into the foreground, as the leader of the march set in our front, will itself take up most of the business of education out of our hand. If souls comes into front, then soul will take most of the business out of our hand. So this is seventh principle, and the third principle is, and the eighth is the growth of consciousness, is the object of education. Growth of consciousness. So this is the eighth. And now let me summarize the whole vision of India, the vision of educational vision of India. It can be put into three elements. And this is also the vision of Maharishi Sri Aurobindo. Plus the psychic education and the growth of consciousness. So what are those three elements? If we are asked, what is India's vision of education? We must have an answer like A plus B whole square formula. What is India's vision of education? It can be answered in three steps. So, Professor Kirit Joshi says, first element, education would mean a rapid psychological process towards perfection. Education is a search for knowledge. Education is a search for values. First aspect. As suggested by Professor Kirit Joshi. And number two, it is also an uncovering of the layers of faculties. Cultivation of them and perfection of them. This is second. And third, it is a process of discovery of the self. Just I have mentioned about the soul, psychic entity. So it is a process of the discovery of the self and aims at a true self-knowledge, which gives liberation from ego and imperfection. So what is called Savidya Ya Vimuktai. And the last one is, education is a search for that knowledge which should fulfill oneself individually and as a harmonious member of the universe. But this is also the meaning of the yoga. So all these aims are also the aims of the yoga. But this can be put into three things. If we are asked what is India's educational vision, it is not about mastery of subject, it is not about introduction to tangible object, it is not about acquiring knowledge. Then what it is? First element is a methodized effort, a methodized organization of life towards its fulfillment. First insight of India's education. A methodized organization of life towards its fulfillment. First aspect. And second aspect, integral knowledge. Integral knowledge. Why it is called integral knowledge? Because it consists of two parts. Upanishad says Paravidya and the Aparavidya. Gita says Khara and Akshara. Khara and Akshara. So Khetra and Khetrajna. And Vivekananda always speaks about grand unification of education, knowledge. So second part is integral knowledge, and integral knowledge means importance of intellect, exploration and realization of superconscious. If we put in easy words, if we are to put in very easy words, integral knowledge means self-knowledge, knowledge about the supreme truth, self-knowledge and the world knowledge. It can also be put in other words. Integral knowledge means science of matter, science of consciousness. Integral knowledge means Aparavidya plus Paravidya. Integral knowledge means science and the matter. So science of consciousness, science of matter. So science of matter is the Aparavidya, science of consciousness is the Paravidya. So India's educational insight is integral knowledge. But at present, we are focusing only on one-sided knowledge. Knowledge of matter, knowledge of world, knowledge of science. But we need both Paravidya and the Aparavidya. And what is the third aspect of India's educational vision? It is the human potentialities and pursuit of individual and collective perfectibility. So potentialities and perfection. So these are the three agenda. A methodized organization of life towards its fulfillment. Second is integral knowledge. Integral knowledge means self-knowledge, knowledge of the supreme truth, ultimate truth, and the knowledge of the world like chemistry, physics, political science, economic, etc., etc. In the language of Upanishad, Paravidya plus Aparavidya. Knowledge of science, knowledge of matter, knowledge of consciousness, knowledge of soul. And what is the third thing? Rather, third aspect is the process. It is the pedagogy. And what is that? This is the expression of the latent potentialities within and the manifestation of the perfection already we have. And with these three elements, you can aid the psychic education plus growth of consciousness. Then you will get the whole philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. And later mother has expanded his idea and formulated her integral education. And integral education is consisting of 5 parts. First one is education of mind, education of body, education of vital means education of pran, and then education of psychic being, and then the spiritual education. So these are the 5 things. So with this, I am concluding. So it's a long subject because life and the philosophy of education. So it's not easy to summarize within 30 or 45 minutes. So my thanks and gratitude to all of you, and namaskar.